Have you ever sat quietly at your kitchen table, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, and wondered, when did being kind start to feel so painful? It's strange, isn't it? You spend most of your life being there for others. Your children, your spouse, your neighbors. You say yes more than you say no. You give without keeping score. You bite your tongue when it stings, because that's who you are. That's how you were raised to be good, to be helpful, to keep the peace. But then one day, you start to notice something. The phone doesn't ring as much. When it does, it's because someone needs something. Your opinions seem to float in the room like background noise, barely acknowledged. You're asked to babysit, to lend money, to watch the dog, to make the holiday meal. But when you ask for something, just some time, some attention, some respect, it's like you've asked for too much. And you sit there, alone with your thoughts, wondering, when did my kindness become a weakness? There's no shame in asking that. In fact, asking that question might be the beginning of a long overdue turning point. Not turning cold or bitter. No, not that. But turning back toward yourself, toward dignity. Let me tell you about Linda. She's 68, lives in a modest house just outside the city. She's got 2 adult daughters. She's always been the yes mom, the dependable one. Her girls knew they could count on her for rides, for rent help, for last-minute childcare, and Linda was glad to help. Really? She saw it as love. But one evening, after hosting yet another family dinner where everyone left their plates and their problems behind, Linda sat at her dining table and cried, not because she was tired, but because it finally hit her. No one ever asked her how she was doing. Not really. They assumed she'd always say yes, because she always had. That night, she didn't feel loved. She felt used. And that's a heavy word, isn't it? One we don't like to say out loud. But it's real. Being too nice, too agreeable, too available, too eager to avoid conflict can slowly chip away at your spirit, especially after 60, when the world already starts treating you like you're fading. When your voice seems quieter in rooms full of younger energy. When your worth starts to feel like it's measured in how much you give. Not who you are. But here's something most people won't tell you. Being kind and being used are not the same thing. And the difference between them is a line that only you can draw. One way Linda started drawing that line was by practicing something that sounds simple, but feels scary at first, pausing. When her daughter called to ask if she could watch the grandkids again for the 3rd time that week, Linda didn't say yes right away. She took a breath and said, "Let me think about that and get back to you." That pause was a revolution. It gave her room to consider her own plans, her own energy, her own needs. It told her daughter, without a single harsh word, that Linda's time mattered too. That she wasn't just a backup babysitter with no boundaries. Kindness doesn't mean you owe everyone your yes. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for others is to respect your limits. Eric, a retired teacher in his early 70s, used to feel like the unofficial therapist of his entire family. His grown children, their spouses, even his nieces and nephews, everyone came to him with their problems. He'd listen for hours, offer advice, try to fix things, and he didn't mind. At first, he liked being useful, but over time, he noticed a pattern. When he needed help, when he had a health scare, or felt lonely, those same people were too busy or too quiet. It broke his heart. So he did something brave. He started choosing his emotional investments. He still listened, still cared, but he stopped pouring his heart into conversations where he was only a sounding board and never heard in return. He began saying things like, "I care about you, but I don't have the space for this today. Can we talk another time?" Or simply, "I'm not the right person to help with this." And the world didn't end. The people who truly loved him understood. Some even said thank you for finally showing them how to respect his time. This isn't about being unkind. It's about being clear. Too many of us confuse being liked with being loved. We think if we keep sacrificing, we'll stay needed. But what we really need, deep down, isn't to be needed. It's to be valued, respected, seen. And that can only happen when you stop erasing yourself for the comfort of others. So ask yourself gently, where in your life have you been too quick to say yes, too afraid to say no, too eager to please? It's not too late to shift that. Not by shouting, not by shutting doors, but by slowly, quietly reclaiming your center, because your time matters, your feelings matter, your space, your body, your energy, they all deserve the same kindness you give so freely to others. And sometimes the first act of real kindness is saying, "Not today." There is a quiet kind of strength that comes from deciding you will no longer abandon yourself. Sometimes it starts with just sitting still, hands in your lap, breathing through the discomfort that comes when you don't say yes out of habit. That's silence. That's not rudeness. That's your dignity settling in. That's your soul saying, "I'm still here." After 60, we carry decades of habits that tell us to smooth things over, to avoid making waves, to make ourselves small if it keeps the peace. Many of us learned that early. Maybe you grew up in a home where conflict meant danger, or where love was something you had to earn by being helpful. Quiet, sir. Easy. That kind of survival seeps into our bones. We become adults who flinch at the thought of letting someone down, who say sure with a smile while swallowing our own needs whole. But here's the truth most people won't say. If you keep pretending you're okay with everything, people will believe you. They won't question if you're tired. They won't wonder if you're overwhelmed. They'll take your silence as agreement and your overgiving as permission. That's what happened to Laura. She's 64 now. Warm-hearted, gentle voice. Always the first to drop everything for a friend in need. But somewhere along the way, her friendships began to feel one-sided. She'd drive across town to bring soup to a sick neighbor, stay up late helping someone fix their resume, but when she needed help moving furniture after a small fall, no one showed up, and it hurt. Not because they were cruel, but because she had trained them, unintentionally, to expect her to never need anything in return. Laura told me, "I didn't even know how to ask for help. I felt embarrassed, like I wasn't allowed to take up space." That's the silent heartbreak of people-pleasing. You become invisible in the very relationships you work so hard to maintain. But Laura did something remarkable. One afternoon, when a friend asked for yet another favor, she paused, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. And she replied gently, "I'm not able to do that today. I need to rest, but I hope it all goes smoothly." The world didn't collapse. Her friend didn't storm off. In fact, they paused too and for the first time asked Laura how she was feeling. That moment opened a door, a small one, but enough to start walking through. You see, being kind doesn't mean you carry everyone's burden until your back breaks. It means you show up with honesty, not obligation. Love without losing yourself. And sometimes that requires the most uncomfortable change of all, allowing people to be disappointed. Yes, that's a hard one, isn't it? We spend so many years trying to make others happy. We fear the frown, the silence, the cold shoulder. But you cannot live your life in fear of being misunderstood. Melissa learned this the hard way. Her son, now 35, had come to rely on her as a constant safety net, financially, emotionally, logistically. She didn't mind helping when he was younger, even into his early 30s. But over time, the help became expected, demanded. And when she said no to paying for a new car, he accused her of not caring. She was devastated. For days, she cried quietly to herself. But when the sadness passed, what remained was something stronger, clarity. Melissa realized she had mistaken fear of rejection for love. She had confused being needed with being valued. And so, she began a new practice, speaking from her calm truth, not from fear, not from guilt. She began saying things like, "I love you, but I'm not in a position to help with that." Or, "I believe in your ability to figure this out." And slowly, the dynamic shifted. It didn't fix overnight, but it stopped the pattern of emotional blackmail. Kindness doesn't mean abandoning your boundaries. It means holding them firmly. So love has a place to grow without resentment. There's a grace in saying, "I will not betray myself to make you comfortable." That's not cruelty. That's wisdom. The older we get, the more we realize peace is expensive when you're the only one paying for it. And sometimes, to find real peace, you have to let go of your need to be understood in the moment. You begin to trust yourself more than you trust others' approval. You learn to rest in your truth without over-explaining, without rushing in to fix everyone else's feelings. And something strange happens. People start to notice the air around you feels different. You don't beg. You don't chase. You don't apologize for your own presence. That shift, that's the beginning of real respect. Nicole, a widow in her early 70s, used to dread family gatherings, not because she didn't love her children and grandchildren, but because she felt invisible when they came. She'd cook, clean, make sure everyone was comfortable, then sit quietly while the conversation swirled around her like she wasn't even there. One day, she decided she was done playing hostess to her own erasure. She left the food simple that year, asked everyone to bring a dish, and instead of rushing around, she sat down in the middle of the room and told a story from her youth. Not dramatic, just something meaningful, and she spoke it like it mattered. And everyone listened. That night, her daughter said, "I didn't know that about you, Mom." And Nicole realized something. She had been asking for respect through service when what she needed was to show up with her presence. Whole and unhidden, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You just need to stop lowering your worth. It takes courage to change old patterns, to step out of people-pleasing, out of over-sacrificing. But every time you do, you step closer to the life you deserve, one rooted in mutual care, not quiet desperation. This journey isn't about becoming hard. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness doesn't begin with changing other people. It begins with choosing yourself. Something beautiful begins to unfold when you stop chasing respect and start embodying it. You walk into the room differently. You move a little slower, but more rooted. You stop trying to fill every silence. You don't offer yourself up like a service. And you begin to notice the very people who once overlooked you now pause. They pay attention, not because you demanded it, but because they feel it. Your presence has changed. Brandon, 66, used to joke that he felt like a ghost in his own family. He'd offer to help with things house repairs, rides to the airport, loaning tools, but when he wanted company or suggested a visit, there was always a reason they couldn't make it. He didn't want to complain. He figured, well, at least they still call when they need something. But it started eating at him, not the silence, but the realization that his worth had become tied to his usefulness. One morning, something inside him just clicked. He stood in front of the mirror and whispered to himself, "I am allowed to matter, even when I am not fixing anything." From that day forward, he stopped offering help unless it felt joyful. He began painting again, a hobby he had abandoned in his 40s, and joined a local group that met every Saturday morning. His son called one afternoon and asked, "Dad, can you help me move this weekend?" Brandon, brush still in hand, smiled and said, "I've got something planned that day. Hope it all goes well." There was silence on the other end. Then, "Oh, okay. I didn't know you had plans." Brandon didn't explain. He didn't apologize. And for the first time in years, he felt free. That's what living the change looks like. Not dramatic confrontations, not shutting doors or burning bridges, just small, clear acts of choosing yourself. When you begin to value your time, others begin to as well. When you stop bending over backwards to prove your love, others stop treating it like a transaction. Kindness isn't loud, but it can be powerful when it comes from a place of deep self-respect. Tiffany, 61, had always been the peacemaker. Her adult children often argued, and she'd be the one to mediate, smooth it over, carry the emotional weight for everyone. She thought that was her role as a mother, but it left her drained, anxious, always waiting for the next call filled with tension. Then one day, she did something different. Her son called, venting angrily about his sister. Tiffany listened quietly. And then, instead of jumping in to solve it, she simply said, "I'm sorry you're upset, but I trust you both to work this out between you. I need to protect my own peace." There was confusion at first, then frustration. But Tiffany held her ground, not with defensiveness, just with softness. And over time, the calls changed. Less venting, more sharing, more curiosity about how she was doing. Because when she stopped positioning herself as the fixer, her children were forced to relate to her as a person, not a tool. Your energy teaches others how to treat you. When you show up grounded, calm, and self-honoring, you shift the emotional atmosphere of your relationships. Not always quickly, but inevitably, you are not just someone's mother, or father, or grandmother, or neighbor. You are a whole human being, with needs, limits, dreams, and joy. That joy matters. Justin, a quiet man in his late 60s, had always put his family's needs first. Retirement didn't change that. He still ran errands for everyone, helped with homework, watched the kids. But something always felt off, like he was fading, even while he was so involved. A friend asked him one day, "When was the last time you did something just for you?" And he couldn't answer. That question haunted him for weeks. Until one Saturday morning, he walked past a guitar shop and felt something stir. He hadn't touched one in decades. But he walked in, bought a used guitar, and started teaching himself to play again. His daughter noticed the change first. "You seem lighter." "Dad," she said, "I don't know what it is." He smiled and said, "Maybe it's the music." She offered to watch the grandkids that weekend so he could go to a local open mic night. It didn't happen overnight, but when Justin began honoring his own joy, his family began making room for it, because he made room for himself first. You don't need to beg for consideration. You don't need to push or prove. You only need to remember, your light isn't something others give you. It's something you already carry. And when you stop dimming it to keep others comfortable, they either draw closer in awe or walk away. But either way, you stay whole. There is a kind of peace that doesn't come from everyone liking you. It comes from liking yourself enough to stop giving yourself away. You can still love deeply, still give generously, still offer a warm meal or a helping hand, but not at the cost of your health, your spirit, or your joy. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You deserve relationships where love isn't proven through depletion, but shared through presence, through quiet, mutual care, through space that allows you to be fully seen, not just as support, but as soul. And the beautiful truth is, once you begin living this way, the right people do see you. They hear you even when you speak softly. They show up not because you guilt them into it, but because they want to stand in your light. You begin to feel love again, not the kind you earn, but the kind that recognizes you without asking for a performance. So breathe gently. Let your shoulders drop. Let the quiet grow. Because you don't need to be loud to be heard. You only need to stand firmly in your light. If you've stayed with me all the way through this video, thank you. Truly, there's something sacred about this kind of honesty, about sitting with the quiet ache we so often carry alone and choosing, together, to look at it gently instead of pushing it away. You didn't have to watch, but you did. That tells me something about you. It tells me you care maybe a little too much sometimes, that you've loved deeply. Perhaps to the point of forgetting yourself, that you're still learning, still growing, still hoping to be seen not just for what you do, but for who you are. That takes courage. You might be in a season where you're realizing things you once accepted no longer feel right. You're no longer satisfied being the one who smooths everything over while your own needs go unmet. You're not bitter. You're just tired of pretending that being endlessly nice is the same as being respected. And if that's you, I want you to know this. You are not alone. What you're feeling is not weakness. It's wisdom. The kind of wisdom that whispers, there has to be another way. The kind of wisdom that doesn't rage, doesn't shame, doesn't point fingers, but simply steps out of the cycle and says, enough. Maybe for the first time in your life, you're ready to be kind without being used, loving without being drained, helpful without being erased. That doesn't make you selfish. That makes you real. And when you become real, when you stop hiding behind constant yeses and start showing up with calm truth, something incredible happens. Your world shifts, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, surely. People begin responding to the energy you carry, not just the favors you offer. You stop living for permission. You start living with purpose, and that's where the healing begins. So let me ask you something now, gently, from one soul to another. Has your relationship with your adult children or anyone close to you changed over time? Do you ever feel like the more you give, the more invisible you become? And more importantly, what helped you grow through it? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Not just for me, but for the many others who will read it and realize they're not the only ones feeling this way. Because healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in community, in shared truth, in brave, quiet moments like this. And if this message touched something in you, if you felt a little more seen, a little more whole, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to this channel. Not for the numbers, not for attention, but so we can keep walking this road together. Because there will always be more to talk about, more to untangle, more ways to reclaim your dignity, your joy, your voice. You deserve a life that isn't built on guilt or obligation. You deserve love that doesn't come at the cost of your self-worth. You deserve peace, and it's closer than you think. It starts the moment you stop asking for permission to be seen. So if today's message meant something to you, stay with me. Click subscribe. Leave a comment. Let's keep this soft, powerful conversation going. You've given so much in this life. Now it's your turn to receive. Not just from others, but from yourself. And I hope you do. Until next time, take gentle care of your spirit. You are worth it. You always have been.